Larsson here. Larsson. Oh, he's in! Henrik Larsson! That is sensational! O'Reilly. How about that for a pass? Jota! How about that for a finish? That is Jota for you!
In for Henrik Larsson. And Moravcik! His first goal for Celtic!
Here is Shunsuke Nakamura! Exquisite!
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Celtic Unrestricted View. My name is Ryan Clifford and joining me on this guest episode is Alan Stirling. Well, as you see, the man on the screen is John Wight, author John Wight, and it is all about his book Jungle Days, which I have kindly got here. That's the cover there. Sent to me by John, and big thank you to Alex as well for getting in contact with us and setting this up. Well, John, fantastic book, mate, of what I've read through so far. Really look forward to getting to know yourself, background in Celtic, and obviously the book as well. Thanks for coming on, mate. Something different for us to talk about and get to know yourself and your background as well on Celtic. So thanks again, John, and I hope you're very well, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for the appraisal of the book. I'm happy to say that it's been well received so far. Came out on the 22nd of September. I've got a few book events coming up at the turn of next year, in the new year, and yeah, I'm happy with it. You know, it was take a few years for me to get round to writing it. It was a daunting task. I'd written a book about boxing, which is another passion of mine, for the same publisher that was published in 2020. Same style, personal memoir, politics, history, and that was well received. So the question then became, what's next? And the idea for the Celtic book was percolating in my mind. But I hesitated before I started it because it's such a daunting subject, Celtic. It means so many to so many people around the world. So I wanted to be sure that I could do it justice, and I hope that I have, ultimately. Obviously,
Alan, it's something different as well. Obviously, we're normally just talking about Celtic and everything going on, and we do have the odd guest footballer-wise. So to get an offer on Alan, obviously, about Jungle Days, it's about Celtic and everything else. So it's really good to get John's opinion on, obviously, things for the past, and that is in the book as well, we'll touch on. But how are you, Alan? And obviously good to get John on the channel, mate.
Oh, very well. Hope you guys are well. Thanks for coming on again, John. Hope everyone that's watching is well. No, it's great to have someone like John on to speak, get a kind of different perspective what we usually feel. Obviously, Ryan, you're a touch younger than myself, but I was born in 1987, so it's always going to be kind of educational when we're listening to what's happened before maybe our time. So it's I've heard kind of a lot of stories, whether it be my uncles, my dad, etc. We've read all we can kind of within social media, within Google, within the internet. But for someone that's kind of that passionate to be writing a book about it, to know firsthand about what's experienced, that's always very nice to hear. So I'm looking forward to this podcast, and yeah, looking forward to hear John's thoughts on things.
Brilliant. Obviously, John is as well. Obviously, John, you're an author. You've done, like you said, other books. What was your first gauge of being an author? Is it something you've always went to school upwards, or is it something you just stumbled in? I'm actually quite good at this, and I want to can I carry it on as a future career?
That's a good question. My love of books came from my mother, Nora. She loved books. I grew up in a very low income working class background, housing scheme in the west side of Edinburgh, Stockton Mains. But one of the things, there was a lot of chaos, there was domestic stuff going on, alcoholism, the usual. You know, my dad was in and out of prison. Well, I say the usual for me. But one of the things my mum relied upon as a kind of sanctuary was books. She never had a book at her hand. So I inherited that love of books. And then at school, I was quite good at English. I left school at 15, but before that, I harboured ambitions of being a journalist, and I used to write for the school newspaper. Then I left school, I just went crazy. I just went down a completely different path, got involved in a lot of trouble and nightlife stuff, working the doors in Edinburgh and going to America and so on and so forth. I came back to writing after I broke my neck in a car accident in northern Mexico, doing something I shouldn't have been doing. I'm sure you can imagine what that was, in 1992. And then I had a year, I was lucky to survive, really lucky to survive. But the year of convalescing that ensued, I had time to think and contemplate my life and what direction I was going in. And that's when I started reading, because I'd gone through a major event and I wanted to try and understand life. I realised then that life is very important. You know, it's not a game, and we're not here forever. And then I started reading literature again. I started reading books and trying to educate myself. I had no formal education to speak of. As I say, I left school at 15. So I would sit with these books, philosophy, literature. Every second or third word I could not understand, but I'd have a big dictionary at my side. This was obviously the days before Google.
Yeah.
And I had a journal, and if I came across a word I didn't understand, I would stop, look up the dictionary definition, write it down in the journal, and then go on. And by the time I'd done that 3 times for the same word, then that word had become imbued into my vocabulary. So that was my start in writing. Then I started to get published and so on, and it just grew from there. I developed a passion for writing, for the written word, and it's a passion that I, continue to have to this day.
It's quite true what John says there, Aaron. Obviously, life in terms of now, obviously things happen every day, and it does give you a kind of perspective. Like John says, sorry to hear that, John. Obviously, it's good to know you, but you're obviously much better health now. Things do happen in life, Alan, that you go, right, I need to kind of enjoy life more, or take it more serious. Like John says, it's not a game. You're only here once, and you need to enjoy what you can. So it's quite kind of interesting there that John says something happened. Right, I now need to do this, and then he's obviously took that path now to writing, Aaron.
Yeah, no, I think that everybody in life, I think, has got different avenues that we can go down. I personally can relate to what John's saying, maybe not to that degree, but there is choices that you make in life that you realise that once you go down that path, that's maybe the wrong one. So you learn from that, and you grow up in a certain sense. In my perspective, I thought I've made mistakes, just like I'm sure yourself and John have. But it's where we end up at the end of the day. It's where we are just now that matters. So if we can kind of notice that, we can correct that path in our life, then that's got to be applauded and kind of appreciated. So yeah,
I think it's important to have a purpose. Your purpose might be, your family. It might be football. It might be a hobby. It might be, in my view, in my case, writing. I think it's good to have a purpose, something that gets the passions flowing, gets the blood flowing, makes you feel alive. Some people, it's their work, it's their job, it's their business. And I think when you find that, I think life takes on a totally different meaning and dimension. And I was fortunate to find that, albeit through incredibly unfortunate circumstances that turned out to be the best thing, ironically, that ever happened to me. There's a broken neck. So for anybody who needs to hear this, who's watching, adversity can actually be the making of a person. What's the Nietzsche quote? That which does not kill you makes you stronger. I think in my case, it's certainly been proved true. And the life experience that I had is the well from which I draw upon as a writer. Life experience is currency for somebody in my profession. So things often work out in a way that you didn't expect them to, but take you from a bad place to a good place. And I think for people who are going through adversity right now, nothing ever lasts forever, good times nor bad times. You just have to keep your cool and keep a certain perspective on life and on things, and understand that you can't avoid the waves, but you can learn how to surf. I think that's a good.
That's to be admired, John. Definitely. I think a lot of people will be listening. They'll maybe kind of take some solace for that as well if they're going through some troubles, etc. So it's definitely to be admired. But just when we're talking about kind of inspiration, your inspiration for this book, where did your inspiration for Celtic come from? Where did your love and affection for Celtic? When did that register in your life, and how did that come about?
It came about through anti-Catholic bigotry that I experienced as a kid growing up. in Stockton Mains. I mean, I know that divide is synonymous with the West Coast, but it certainly exists everywhere in Scotland, not maybe to the same intensity and extent. And as I actually mentioned in the book, a lot of Celtic fans won't know that the inspiration for the formation of Celtic in 1887, 88, 87 when the committee was met in St Mary's Church in the Carlton, 88 when Celtic first took to the field, the inspiration was Hibs, Hibernian FC. And the difference between Celtic and Hibs at the time was that Hibs not only had to be a Catholic to play for Hibs at that time in history, you had to be a mass attending Catholic. And so James Connolly, one of the leaders of the Irish Rebellion in 1916, he was from Edinburgh, of course. He grew up a Hibs supporter. And many people from Glasgow travelled to Hibs games. A lot of Hibs support came from Glasgow because they were the prominent Irish Catholic club in Scotland at the time. So my inspiration came from life experience, growing up in the scheme, went to a Catholic school at age 5, suddenly you're different from all your pals. That manifested in later years, and that's kind of becoming a little bit of a problem. You Fenian bastard this. Can I swear on this podcast?
You can swear that, but don't say if it's that side of the city.
Your Catholics see that, etc.
Yeah.
I was one of only 3 Catholics in the scheme at the time growing up.
Yeah.
I went to St Joseph's, which was like half a mile away from the state school where all my pals at that stage went to. And I was incredibly defiant by nature. And then I found Celtic as a sanctuary from that, a feeling of belonging with people who are of the same cultural background. My brother was a Celtic fan, my older brother Rab, no longer with us, and he started taking me to Celtic games from, I think, 1977, when Celtic would play in Edinburgh against Hearts or Hibs. And I just loved it. I fell totally in love with it. I love the defiance of the Celtic fans. Celtic existing in a hostile environment in Scotland for historical reasons. And then when I was 14, I started going to Celtic matches on my own. The most spectacular of which is, I'll begin the book, is the 1980 Scottish Cup final against Rangers when they're fighting on the pitch after the game. So that was I think a lot of Celtic fans have come to the club on the same basis, a search for identity within a kind of hostile environment in which Irish Catholic migrants or people of that background grow up in. Maybe it's not so fierce today. Well, it's not so fierce, but you've got to remember in the 1980s, guys, the Troubles in Ireland were still raging. And that informed the social divisions in Scotland at the time because it was so close and it was so connected. And that informed the Old Firm football and the songs on the terracing and the passion for the club that the fans exuded at the time. So I was part of that. And it was quite a wonderful thing, looking back, very exciting. But I did find comfort and meaning in Celtic and gave me a sense of belonging, that I did belong and I could be proud of my cultural background and my religious roots.
Sorry, again, man. Just in my time, obviously I was born in 87, I grew up vastly in the 90s, but in your opinion, I agree, but in your opinion, has society vastly changed since that time? I'd probably say so. I think it was a hell of a lot worse when I was growing up, that kind of divide.
Well, I've got the memory when I first started applying for jobs, and it was a handwritten application form. My dad would tell me, don't say you were at a Catholic school. What school were you at? So there you go.
I had that my first job. My first job, somebody said to me, there was a tradesman saying that would they work with me. My first day in the job as an apprentice, he was working with me because I was a Catholic. He came up to me and says, "But what school did you go to?" So it was still there, but for me in the last kind of 20 years or so, I think it's vastly changed.
Oh, it's certainly dissipated. But the fact there's still a plethora of orange walks in Scotland, they are trying to affirm the hegemony or the primacy of a Protestant culture in Scottish affairs, and I think I think when they go, then that will be a huge leap forward. But I do agree with your central point that in terms of employment, in terms of access to opportunities, it's much different today. The landscape's totally been transformed from what it was in the early 1980s. And obviously Rangers didn't sign their first prominent Catholic player until Graham Souness came on the scene, which is something else we may get onto, because that was seminal as well for various reasons.
That goes on to a point, one of the co-hosts of the show, JP, he's actually asked that. Obviously his dad says it's maybe worse now, but what's your opinion? Alan mentioned the rivalry. Obviously I wasn't born then. for me, the rivalry's still there, but I was at the game on Sunday there, I was next to the Rangers fans. It was a bit of to and fro, but it was nothing, it wasn't really, it was all haha, yes, but it was nothing really. Obviously, people are obviously more mature now, and obviously people lose their jobs, so you don't really get into all that now. You're there to watch the football, you go home and you have a bit of banter with your pals, but was the rivalry, I'm just getting my sense of speaking to you on the sense of the book, speaking to my dad, etc. Back then, the rivalry compared to now,
it was unbridled hatred. It was unbridled hatred. My memories of the jungle were of when Celtic played Rangers at Parkhead, or when Celtic played at Ibrox. It was just unbridled hatred. They hated each other. The famous Archie McPherson commentary when the fighting was on the pitch, when he said, "Let's be honest, these fans hate each other," and that was absolutely true. We hated Rangers. I remember going to the 1980 Cup final and walking from the bus park towards Hampden, the Celtic end, and a Rangers supporters bus had obviously taken a wrong turn and ended up in the Celtic end, and there was not one window in that bus intact. The bottles were flying towards the bus. I mean, it was just hatred. They wanted to kill each other. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. Again, there was a wider context. The Troubles were a thing that informed the hatred because of what was going on in Ireland and obviously mainstream mainland Britain. And that again, that fed into the passion on the field and in the stands and in the terracing. But the jungle was a place of hatred for Rangers. Make no mistake about it. Unabashed, unbridled, unfettered hatred. Maybe that was, for a young kid my age who's naive, that was part of the attraction. I found it exciting. The danger was exciting. The electricity was exciting. Rebel songs were sung one after the other with pride. Songs that are not sung today, which I think is a good thing. But they were sung because they had to be sung because of the mismanagement of Ireland by various British governments. That's obviously a wider political view, but I talk about that in the book as well. But yeah, it was an incredibly divisive time within the Scottish working class on the basis of that rivalry across the I wouldn't say sectarian divide, because Celtic is not a sectarian club. Irish Republican politics are not sectarian from inception. Not saying there's not sectarians being involved in Irish politics or Celtic supporters, but in terms of the different ethos between both clubs, Celtic has got a much more expansive and inclusive on the pitch, and in terms of support for wider causes like Palestine today, Rangers is much more exclusive, in terms of how they see themselves and how they fit into Scottish culture and wider Scottish society.
Obviously, you mentioned the football, the Scottish Cup final, the 10th of May, 1-0, obviously against Rangers. By going with the book, I think you were at that game as a young kid. George McCluskey obviously scored the riot after the game. Obviously, vaguely, I'd imagine you remember due to what happened after the game. That obviously stopped the alcohol in Glasgow of Scottish games. People might think now that alcohol should be back in and stuff. Well, no, that's again, like you say, John, it's a wider. I don't agree with it, but it's a wider.
I don't agree with it either. Yeah.
But in terms of your experience of that game, and obviously your experience of going to games and stuff, how was that, and then how did that lead up to obviously the rest of the 80s?
Well, I mean, the 80s were a tumultuous decade for Scottish football. You had the rise of the new firm under Alex Ferguson and Jim McLean, with Aberdeen and Dundee United, respectively. They had great success in Europe. I mean, it's amazing what those two clubs achieved with the size of them compared to the Celtic and Rangers at the time. I remember, for example, if when we played Aberdeen, even at home, not much less away at Pittodrie, if you got a draw, it was a good result. That's how good Aberdeen were until 1986 when Ferguson left for Man United. Dundee United not so much, but they were a great side as well. Paul Sturrock, Dave Neary, brilliant players,
Under Jim McLean?
Jim McLean, wonderful players. They beat Real Madrid in the Cup Winners' Cup final, 84 was it? Brilliant teams. So football was much more exciting in that sense. It was much more competitive. Dundee United won 1 league title, Aberdeen won 2. Celtic won 3, I think, in the 1980s. Obviously, the most important one was 88, the centenary year, when they won the league and cup double. Souness came on the scene after the Heysel disaster, so that brought up a slew of top-class English internationals to Rangers, and that brought the game up to a more competitive standard. Scottish teams, top Scottish teams, could compete with their English counterparts in the 80s, certainly towards the latter half, to the extent that probably not today. Obviously, the money that the English game has been injected with was not a thing then. So the levels were really, on a par. Celtic was going through a transition period. I'd say from the mid-70s to the early 80s was a very, well, I don't say, I think it clearly was a fallow period. The legacy of the Lisbon Alliance still hangs over the Celtic club. Some would say like an inspiration, others would say like an incubus because of the pressure it puts on succeeding teams. It's certainly when they play in Europe. And then the Quality Street Gang, Dalglish, McGrain, McCarry, and all those guys. Paul Wilson, another great Celtic player, one of the first Indian players to play for any team in Scotland. So Celtic, as I say, was in transition. Jock Stein had gone, so Billy McNeill took the helm, and then latterly Davy Hay, then Billy McNeill again. But they still had some wonderful players: Charlie Nicholas, Brian McClare, later on Frank McAvenny, Tommy Burns, of course, Roy Aitken, Danny McGrain was still doing his thing up and down the right wing. But the competition was so high that the game was in a much healthier state than it is today, in my view, in Scotland.
Sounds like Alan. On you go, mate.
Well, last year we actually held a live event with Joe Miller, and he was very he gave us a great insight about some of the players that played during his time at Celtic. I'd asked him about maybe 20, 25 players that he played with, didn't I, Ryan? I says, who's better than who? All the way through it, it was Roy Aitken all the way. He says Big Roy was like the best player in that team by a mile. Obviously, you think back to that time. Who's the players you looked at that excited yourself, John? Who's the players that you thought was the biggest quality that we had within our side at that time?
I love Davy Provan. I thought he was really exciting on the wing. The iconic socks at the ankles. He could go past players. He could ghost past players. He had great delivery. Tommy Burns, I thought, was brilliant. He could thread a ball, box to box midfielder. Obviously, his passion for the team. Roy Aitken was a fantastic leader on the park. This huge presence, imperious. When he played with Celtic, you felt they could walk through walls. That was the kind of spirit he brought to the team. He stiffened the team, especially in times when they were getting beat. His resilience, his never say die attitude. I also love Peter Grant. Peter Grant was he would have played for Celtic for nothing. He loved the team that much. He in the cup final he played the team, not the game. He was at war when he played Rangers, and he made no bones about it. I loved his spirit, his mindset. Wonderful players. Brian McClare. I just wish Brian McClare had stayed longer.
I was talking to my dad, John. He says obviously back then it was a record, 800 grand. That was nothing, was it? No.
I mean, well, Charlie. A player who gets much maligned, who I love because I was a teenager then, was Charlie Nicholas. He gets much maligned because when he post Celtic, he critically Celtic, so he's not viewed with a lot of affection by many Celtic fans. But in his day, he was fantastic. He was almost unplayable. He played in Sammy Nelson's testimonial that I was at in London in 1980.
I read that in the book, yeah.
That was a wonderful experience. And he signed for Arsenal in 83. And it's Frank McGarvey defending him because Celtic fans thought that he'd betrayed the club. He came up through the boys, the youth set up and so on. But as Frank McGarvey said, there's a quote in the book, I'm paraphrasing now, he said, Celtic offered Charlie a new contract, something like £600 a week. A lot of money in those days, clearly. But Arsenal were offering him something in the order of £2.5 grand. So for a young guy like him, going to London, he's single, you have to understand, the days of a player staying at the same club throughout their whole career were coming to an end by this point. Players were now looking for money. Agents were coming into the game. They were negotiating contracts. And rightly so, you might say, players were products of their era. They're looking to make money. This was the Thatcher era where money was king. Greed is good. So I love Charlie Nicholas. He was brilliant. He had a great partnership with Frank McGarvey. Frank McGarvey was kind of a version of Kenny Dalglish, not as good, but very good in terms of the way he could hold up the ball. He was a nuisance. He could hold up the ball and the way that they fed off each other. Frank McGarvey was fantastic with his back to goal, and Nicholas would come on to his passes as he fed him as he was running into the box. It was a wonderful partnership, and they had great success.
It's like you miss some of the players, obviously McCluskey and guys like that, Paul McStay later on, and there's just obviously nowadays there's certain guys that we think are good, but speak to yourself now, and I've spoke to Alan, I've spoke to my dad, and there's some of the players that are obviously talented players, but I think, Alan, it's interesting as obviously John says, like go to the games and back now. I don't think the atmospheres is, we'll touch on as we go, but the atmospheres are good. But I think the way John's I think obviously ferocious, I hated that, I get all that, but in terms of the atmospheres go to the game, and I think it sounds like, talking to John here, my dad, other people in the past, it was more exciting going to games then. It was the passion, the crowds, the atmospheres. I've read, hostile, but I mean, just in terms of, it was like football Saturdays. Yeah. I've read in John's book as well, like the smells of the hot dog vans, the chip. It's everything back then just seems no happier, but got to the games was, nowadays, Alan, I think it's more like society's moved on. But what's your thoughts on that? Yeah, what's your thoughts on that, Alan? Do you think back then it seems like, obviously hostile, take away the hostile side of it, but got to see the players. Nowadays it's like McGregor and stuff, but compared to back then, Alan, it seems more exciting to go and watch the players on the park than maybe it is now. Obviously it's dearer now to go and see these players, but back then it was, I can't wait to go see Celtic.
I think it's probably because of the fact that it's more accessible now on kind of whether it be television, whether it be social media, whether it be the dodgy VPN Fire Stick that I seem to be watched where I get a flight to Paris so that I can watch.
What you don't talk about on here.
Aye, never. So it's a change in society. You can see that quite clearly. That But back then you would be waiting like a couple of days to hear in the newspaper about a transfer, whereas now in social media you're hearing kind of rumour after rumour after rumour before even anything's happened. And just when I touched on kind of being hostile, I could say on a previous podcast before, one of my dad's story that I think that might have been, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but is it 1980 we played Real Madrid? Was it after that?
I was going to mention that actually.
Yeah, 88 Parkhead. Yeah.
So my dad went to both games, so we won, if I'm correct, we won 2-0 at Celtic Park.
Yeah, that's right.
My dad went over to the Bernabeu, and he says there was like three tiers in the Bernabeu, and they put the Celtic fans in the middle tier. So it was like, he says it was hostile beyond belief. He says they were for the top, they were throwing like coffee, they were urinating on them. It was like, if he says if Celtic had qualified that night, they would have got there alive. He says he'd never felt anything like that, and obviously, sadly, we get defeated 3-0 on that night, and went out of the competition. So I think worldwide in society as well, not just this country, I think the whole society has changed, and kind of football within that, and there was maybe a lot more passion, shall we say, during the 80s, 90s and beforehand. And I think it probably would have felt, to your original question, Ryan, I think it would have felt a lot more special back at that time because of the lack of accessibility to see your team.
Yeah.
Whereas it might have just been highlights here and there. Now it's constantly, you see it everywhere you look, you're seeing football highlights.
Yeah, that's a very pertinent point, Alan. The saturation of football today is compared to the 80s, whereas you had a Wednesday night game maybe and a Saturday. So you had a big build-up, you had limited platforms by which to access football, the back pages of the mainstream newspapers, there was no internet. So the game on a Wednesday night or a Saturday took on huge importance in a working man's week and working women's week. That the game, the build-up was exciting, it was something to look forward to. And so that fed into the passion in the stadium because, you knew this was something special, this was a highlight of your week. Whereas now you can be watching football games every night of the week at home or on your phone or whatever. That has fed into the difference in the way that people view football and how they consume football compared to the 1980s. It was really a cause. I know Celtic is always going to be a cause to live by because of the history and its unique identity. for, not just footballing reasons, but as I argue about political reasons as well. But the saturation factor is key in how people view football. They get so much of it that it maybe doesn't have the same excitement attached to it as it did in the 80s. And if you played Real Madrid at Parkhead in 1980, that was a special occasion, or any European tide, or any friendly, or any testimonial. Celtic were always in demand for testimonials. I'm not sure it's the same case today, because when we went down to see, I had to plead my mum to let me go. It was a Wednesday night game. The Celtic bus left on just after midnight on the Tuesday, so it was an overnight journey down to London. And Celtic took down around, I would say, 15,000 fans for a midweek testimonial in London. Just imagine, because they were so passionate. They just needed, they would follow the team anywhere, because they weren't oversaturated with games. And some of the guys on that bus were taking days off work, sick, to go and see. I don't know if people would do that today to the same extent, is what I'm saying, because of the saturation and the fact you can see games live from the comfort of your home, from a bar. Whereas in those days, live football was really not a big thing on television, apart from the cup final, the Scottish Cup final, really, at the time.
I remember growing up and looking at a night time at a away game, looking on teletext for the score, waiting on it, refreshing, etc. on teletext. So that was the difference. Like, you didn't have any accessibility to get the score lines, etc. Maybe the radio would have it on.
I remember on the terrace, and you'd have guys with the transistor radios to their ear listening to other games as they're watching Celtic, and they shout out the results, especially if it was a critical game. That was brilliant. To hear that crackle of a transistor radio to somebody's ear as you're watching your own game. Just a huge leap in technology, and a huge leap thereby in culture and cultural values, and how people, as I say, consume football. In some ways it's better. There's not as much violence. There was violence at almost every game back in the 80s. Certainly when Celtic played Rangers, there was always multiple arrests. So people, you might say, are much more civilised, for good or for bad. There was a rawness to the game and to the culture then that there's no longer here. It's much more refined. It's a good thing. I mean, I certainly wouldn't sit here and say I support violence. Of course not. But the culture was very violent in those days, in terms of just, fights breaking out in the terraces, even amongst Celtic fans themselves. And a big thing of that, you touched upon this, Ryan, is alcohol. The alcohol ban was a game changer for Scottish football in a good way.
Did you think that had, and obviously you don't want anything to happen, but do you think that had to happen?
Yes.
Now? Yeah.
I've got the strong memory of being at a game at Easter Road. I think Celtic lost 4-2. I think this was in the this was 79. And at one stage, there was just a hail of bottles coming down from the back of the Celtic end at Easter Road at Dunbar end. And you're having to run out your way and all the rest of it. So, it's important not to romanticise it, There were some great, I've got some great memories. Of course I have. It was a wonderful time to grow up, I think. Certainly compared to young kids now. I would prefer to have grown up in my era. But there was ugliness around the edges of football. It was part of the DNA of football fan culture in Scotland, and especially with the Old Firm, because of the wider political issues and historical identities that both clubs have and hold and possess still to this day. One thing I'll say though quickly on this is it's really regrettable to me that the away fans don't have a full allocation at Celtic and Rangers games. I believe it was Rangers started that. That's had a really deleterious impact on the atmosphere at these games. I mean, if you went to Parkhead, you would take up the whole. Pardon?
Odson Edwards started it, I'm sure. He scored the goal, aye. At the Broomlawn, didn't he?
It'd be good if they get that back to where it used to be. It might be easier for policing, I get that. But in terms of the atmosphere at the games, I mean, look at you were at Hampden Sunday, yeah?
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference when you see both clubs have got a full allocation of tickets for the fans to give it that really crucible effect. And that has an effect on the players as well. And I think it lifts their performances. So let's hope that returns to full allocation. Obviously
in the book as well, you mentioned the biscuit tin era. Obviously Celtic didn't have the money, obviously. Even now, some people might say we've got biscuit tin mentality certain times. I think one, I don't think it was the 1980s or so, but there was one season I looked at a bit of research. We only bought 3 players for like 60 grand. If you'd done that now, we've all had uproar about buying an Amura for so many. So it's not really changed. But what was your experiences through then, John? Obviously, the board level back then, not spending money, wanting to progress the club. It seems to me, just getting talk to you, talk to other guys back then, maybe my standards are now, I think Celtic can spend more money and do better than they are. Was that similar back then, that they might not have the money, but the money they're using, it's not using to the extent to progress the club, and maybe the board were holding them back to progress the club back then, or was it just no money to do it?
The board in the 1980s was overtaken by reality, the swift nature of changing events where money came into the game, where you could buy success. Celtic still had a model of the youth academy, bringing players up from, they had huge success with that, obviously, in the 60s and the 70s, and they kept to that model to the detriment of the modernising of the game that was taking place despite them. Rangers, of course, with Souness and David Murray, they were spending money. We all know now it was dodgy money, but they were spending money in a cavalier fashion. But Celtic still held to that model of keeping the wages low, because the concept was that it was compensation just to put on a Celtic jersey. That was the feeling of the board. You know, you're a Celtic player, that should be compensation enough. And whatever you get over on that is a bonus. That obviously didn't fit with the modern era, which 1980s was the start of the modern era, with Thatcherism and loosening up the economy to anybody can make it and so on and so forth. So the Celtic board lacked imagination and vision in that sense. I mean, the only streams of revenue, I think, at the start of the 80s the Celtic had was through the turnstile and Celtic pools.
I've read that in your book,
in the Celtic View newspaper. And then I think, was it 82, C.R. Smith sponsored the team, they sponsored both clubs.
That's right, aye.
And that was when sponsorship came into it and so on. So the men tasked with making money and revenue, they lacked vision. Also, you have to remember the average attendance at Parkhead in the early 80s was about 18,000 to 22,000, other than when they played Rangers. Because people were struggling under Thatcher's economic structural adjustment. You know, unemployment had spiked. A job for life was a thing of the past. So people just didn't have the money to go to football every single week. Season ticket sales were paltry compared to now. So the club was struggling financially. And as you know, success breeds success. Because they couldn't spend money, then there was no success on the park. Then the fans wouldn't turn up to see the product on the park. And that was the pattern throughout the 80s until, of course, in 1994, Fergus McCann came on the scene and he changed the whole business model, which is the model that the club still adheres to this day, which I think is outdated now, based on how it was in 1994. It's right, you say, I think Celtic's revenue last year was 70 million, something in that order. And the summer transfer window was a disaster. However, bringing things up to current events, I have heard that the football directors at what's his name? Paul Tisdale. He did offer Brendan Rodgers a slew of players, which were all turned down by Rodgers. So I don't know if there was a power struggle taking place there with the football director and the head of recruitment and Rodgers, but that's another story. But the point remains that the money wasn't there, but the Celtic board didn't have the vision, didn't have somebody like a David Murray to come in and drag the club into modern times, as Murray did Rangers when he took over. I think it was 85, 86.
Obviously, like John mentioned, obviously the money not really getting spent, the lack of vision, lack of want to progress the club. I sometimes think that now. Obviously, like John says, it's a different story. We can touch on it till the end in terms of present time. But back then, obviously, the fans, maybe similar to me and you and other people, we think the standards should be better and we want to progress the club. Seems like John and other guys at that time was wanting that as well, but the mentality, the vision of the club, it just wasn't there. And obviously, Rangers come in, more money. We all know the situation now. It's obviously leading towards it now. We all know that. Obviously, like John says, Aberdeen, United, there was a bit more competition. And obviously, back then, it seems like Biscuit Tin Eater, I think John's bang on. And in the book, people have mentioned that before. The Biscuit Tin, it is really like Biscuit Tin. You've got the money to spend, but because you've got a Celtic jersey, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get paid handsomely more, or you shouldn't go and get players to help the club out.
When we spoke to Joe Muller, did he not say that Aberdeen offered him more money than Celtic, didn't they?
And he stayed at Celtic,
That's it. Billy McNeil said, got him in and just stayed here, didn't he? So, it's probably, it's a different era now. Even you look back then, the kind of, you don't want to say pennies because of how kind of working class that Glasgow would have been, and how much there was struggles going on in terms of finance and kind of surviving. So it would have been a luxury, as John says, that a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford. It's quite desperate times for everything that I've read into the matter. So I think culture of society has changed since. I think you look at probably started, as John says, when David Murray, Graham Souness, etc. came in when Rangers started spending big. Well, it was probably after Fergus came in, we tried to match that, but you're looking at even up to, I think the last time I can remember that we matched kind of English clubs for transfer fees when Alan Shearer was up after the Euros. Alan Shearer was up for sale to Blackburn, and Celtic and Rangers both put in the same £15 million bid as Newcastle, as Man United, as Inter Milan, as Real Madrid, etc. So that was a time that Celtic and Rangers, whether it be right or wrong in terms of across the city, how they spent their money, that was a time where Celtic and Rangers could compete at the same level in regards to kind of finance and transfers as the clubs down south and as clubs kind of across Europe. Now, well, in the biggest kind of different ball game you could ever imagine, whereas we're making the clubs in different continents, especially the clubs in different countries, especially kind of down south in England, they can easily spend kind of 10, 20 times.
Well, the television money is a huge factor, obviously.
Yeah.
The ecosystem in which Scottish football operates, there's no television money. It's a fraction of what the English league gets. And also Serie A and the Bundesliga, etc. They make huge revenue from broadcasting rights and television money. And so Scottish football suffers from the lack of that. I don't think there's a 50 million player in the current Celtic side. When was the last time Celtic spent £50 million on a player? So they have to go further afield. They have to be a bit more, expansionist in the recruitment. Under Ange Postecoglou's reign, obviously a lot of Japanese players came over because he knew the Japanese game, and that was hugely successful. But the trade-off is, this is where I'm going to get into the passion for Celtic. Most of the players in the Celtic team in the 80s were homegrown. They got the club. They knew the meaning of the club. I'm not saying that the influx of foreign players or overseas is a really good thing. But the trade-off is maybe they don't get the club to the same extent. Some do. I'm a praying aid for that. Paolo Di Canio, remember him? He got it, to a large extent. But a lot of them don't get it to the same extent. The homegrown players will try and impart that. You've got Callum McGregor, who is the beating heart of this Celtic team. But so the homegrown players knew what it meant to the fans. They come from the same culture, the same background to a large extent. And that told on the field of play. But Celtic board, they suffered from a lack of vision and just a lack of revenue, and they had no idea how to generate revenue over and above the traditional ways. And coming up to today's board, to defend them to some extent on that, they remember, let's not forget, Celtic almost went into receivership before Fergus McCann rescued the team. That's going to play in the back of the minds of any Celtic board today. They're thinking stability, safety first. To a fault, that's gone too far. They're thinking the club has to have a big pot of money to ensure its survival. Yeah. But I think the current board are more interested in shareholder dividends and taking money out of the club than put it on the pitch. A football team is not, by definition, a football club is not a normal business. And I think this board errs on the side of treating it as a normal business. Looking at the balance sheet, the bottom line, rather than seeing the success on the park and bringing the fans on board. Because when that trinity works, the fans, the board, and the team, it's unstoppable.
Yep.
It worked in the 60s. I mean, the Lisbon Lions are proof of that for different reasons. Obviously, they were all homegrown players. But there was a synergy. That synergy is no longer there, and it hasn't been for a long, long time. And I think it's worrying to me that the lack of transparency on the part of the board, then in the 80s and really up to now, where the fans are just seen as take it or leave it, commodity. They've got nowhere else to go. That's the way the fans are treated. They're neglected, the fans.
And as a customer, John, we've been saying for a while, instead of seen as a support, the fans are now seen as a customer. We're seen as how much the current board could get out of us. And when we look back a couple of years ago when Ange came in, we've been looking for this kind of modern, forward-thinking CEO, and we had him, and he gets swiftly shown the door in Dominic Mackay. And that was probably, you were saying that this board has to kind of adapt and adjust just now to go forward-thinking. That was probably a step in the right direction. That guy started showing a bit more communication. He was showing a bit more forward thinking. He was showing us leading us into the kind of 21st century. So, for that,
well, let me riddle me this, Alan and Ryan. Would a modern, young, forward-thinking CEO like Dominic Mackay was, would he have issued that excoriating statement that Dermot Desmond did against a manager?
Oh no!
Regardless if it was deserved or not. That was
Shakespeare when wrote that.
Exactly. That was that. I mean, I'm not defending Rodgers. I think, as I said at the outset before we came on air, I think the issue primarily was Rodgers, but it wasn't only Rodgers. But would a forward-thinking professional CEO of a major institution like Celtic have issued such a statement, but essentially washing the club's dirty clothes in public like that? You know, that to me just shows how things are in the board right now. Dermot Desmond has far too much sway. I think there needs to be some kind of movement within the board. Is Willie Hockey coming back into the frame?
There's rumours, Sean, but there's nothing set in stone. But there's been rumours. He was at the game the other night, last week. Yeah.
I think Dermot Desmond is coming round to being a malign actor in Celtic affairs. He spends more time in the golf course than he does at the club, etc., etc. He's like an absentee landlord. And then when he does come in and make an intervention, it's cack-handed to the extreme, as that statement was. And I don't think that did. Yes, it did Brendan Rodgers' reputational harm, but it did Celtic reputational harm. And I think it got very personal. I don't think a modern CEO with professionalism, who understands the dynamics of an institution like Celtic and understands the importance of public relations, would have dared come up with that statement. Or or he would have tried to block it at least. You know.
I agree with you.
There'll probably be linked to a Spanish guy for the CEO called Pedro Valverde. Obviously he'll come back and somebody else. That's no doubt will happen. But they're so out of touch. That original statement that they put out for the fans originally, it boggles the mind. Somebody can actually write that and go, that'll be all right. All the fans will be like, no, that's brilliant. Sound. We'll buy that. It's just, honestly, it's baffling that anybody in their right mind can look at that and go, that's
in the same vein, I mean, I know there's a lot of conjecture among Celtic fans and they don't think alike. We're not one homogenous block, as a lot of people like to think. I don't like the way the Green Brigade are being treated. I personally believe the Green Brigade are the beating heart of the club in this time. The understanding of the club's political identity, its historical roots in politics, in Irish Republican politics, and they're treated like an inconvenient, the embarrassing uncle in the terraces. I don't know what you guys think. I know that not all Celtic fans feel the same way, but I believe they were not allocated tickets for Hampden.
That's right, yeah.
I think that's a disgrace, and I think there should be a stand taken on that issue by all Celtic fans, not even though those that disagree with the Green Brigade, and I know there's a lot of fans that do disagree with some of the messaging that comes out from the Green Brigade in the North Curve, but I do think they are the beating heart of the club. They understand that the club has a deeper meaning than just football.
I think for me, Alan, to what John says, I don't really, again, I just go to football. I'm no, in terms of being honest, Sean, I'm not really, in terms of politics side, I'm not really clued up as much. But I do agree, Alan, that I keep saying, for me, the Celtic atmosphere can be a bit of a myth. I've been to these games where it can be pouring the rain and the football's not great. There's no really singing. Even Green Brigade, when they're not there, North, the boys, I get what John says. You might like them, you might not like what they stand for, whatever else. But in terms of the atmosphere, Alan, at the football club, I sing the odd song at the games, but I go watch the football. I sing the odd chant here and there. But for me, Celtic needs, if it's the Green Brigade or the North Curve or if it's the boys, whoever, they need some sort of organisation at the games, because that atmosphere, for me, Celtic Park can be a library, Alan. That's just my opinion. People might think I'm lying or whatever, but I just think sometimes the atmosphere is no great. But like John does mention as well, Alan, back in the 80s, if the product on the park's no great, then the fans feed off that. We can only feed off what's on the park. If the football's no great, you'll try and support, but if you're not getting that back, Alan, where it's like the spending money and everything else, you tend to know things wrong. You tend not to support because you can only breathe and live what's on the park, Alan. But I do agree with John that take away what you think of the politics side of the game, whether you like it or not. Celtic they are there every week, singing songs, whatever you think about them. I think the terms of tickets, Alan, allocations again, away fans, I just think it's got to come to something because it can't keep going like that, Alan. You can't keep saying you're this and you're that. I do agree with John that they are, in terms of the singing sort and the atmosphere, if they're not there, Alan, what's going to be there? What's your thoughts, Alan?
Definitely, I agree that the atmosphere that they bring, being the kind of beating heart of their club, but I can see it for both ends. I slightly favour the Green Brigade and what they're doing, but I think sometimes they can maybe step beyond their post. They're starting to kind of, we're seeing UEFA fines, we're seeing SFA fines, we're seeing potential kind of bans within Europe for some of the actions that are maybe slightly too far. In an ideal world, I'd say maybe rein it in slightly, but I see that kind of passion, and we need that kind of passion in the atmosphere. So I can see it for both sides that sometimes it is possible that their actions can bring some harm towards the club. But I think as an overall, I would still favour, because I think that atmosphere, that outweighs the negative for me. I think that pro outweighs the negative. I think that the atmosphere they bring outweighs maybe the fines that Celtic get. But in an ideal world, you would want to kind of meet somewhere in the middle there for me.
Yeah,
they can be provocative, but they would argue that that's the whole idea behind what they do, and in terms of raising political consciousness. But I agree, ultimately, if the club's suffering with fines, then a middle ground, the golden mean, as they say, would be an ideal. But that situation, the Green Brigade, has to get resolved, I think, because it can't go on as it is.
I agree, John. Obviously, that's kind of a wee bit about the 80s. I know there's loads we talk about, but obviously want people to read the book and get a more in tune about your experiences. Obviously, the Satiri season, it's well known, it was a historic season, 1988, Scottish and League Cup double. Obviously, John, you're a wee bit older, is obviously younger in the 30s, but a wee bit older, probably more grasping the kind of season and what it meant, the players played there. What was the feeling of that season, John? Was it they had to win it that year because of how historic it would have been? Or was obviously we need to win the league anyway? But was it a
no? It was the impetus was different.
Yeah,
it told on the pitch. The team came together. They
was
understood.
it nervousness, kind of?
It was nervous energy, but to give Big Billy McNeely's credit, he channeled that perfectly.
Yeah,
he more than anyone else was the custodian of the club in '88. He lived and breathed the history with Lisbon Lion and so forth. That we had to win the league. We had to win the league that year, and the double was just the icing on the cake. I've never been prouder to be a Celtic fan than that season, because of what was at stake. Obviously, Rangers on paper had a stronger side, stronger squad, maybe not stronger first 11, maybe on par, but certainly a stronger, more in-depth squad. But the players played beyond themselves, especially in that cup final against Dundee United. They were brilliant. They were brilliant front to back. And there was a team that was playing, they were inspired, I would say, because of that history. They felt that, I'm going to use a cliche, the hand of history on their shoulders. But you knew it was a different season for obvious reasons. I don't think you'll get a season like that again because, again, the enormity. 1888, 1988, 100 years of history, everything the club had been through, the flag campaign I mentioned in the book in the 50s, where the SFA and parts of Scottish society were demanding that the tricolour be removed from Celtic Park or be banned from Scottish football. John Thompson, the story of him when he died in a Rangers game, getting kicked in the head. Everything the club had been through throughout, and the 88 was a culmination at that point. And that was the start. That was the end of that period and the start of the new period. We're coming into the 90s now, and there was another kind of cultural revolution out with and then football was part of that. When more money, people had more money, and football was seen as much more of a commercially viable business enterprise. sport in general was becoming much more available to the masses, mass participation, also mass consumption, and football became sexy again. In the 1990s, we saw the Oasis and the revolution of music and Simple Minds and so on. All these groups were all sort of attached to football clubs. So 88 was the end of something, but also the start of something for Celtic, and I would say in the game in general. But yeah, that 88 season was something else. You would have had to have been there to believe it.
Was there any, obviously the win title of the game and obviously the cup final, but was there any momentum swing in that season where obviously I don't know everything, so was there any time maybe behind the league or the game they had to win it? Maybe similar to like the now, but through a wee bit
Well,
of
I think the signing of Frank McAvenny was
he
key.
scored 2 in the final, didn't he?
Yeah. He changed everything. He was like Mo Johnston's replacement. It would have been good to see these two in the same team, see what they were like as a partnership. Maybe they would duplicate what, but he changed it for me. He became a wonderful anchor man up front. Great player, could shoot with both feet, great talisman. And I think his goal tally that season was phenomenal, and that changed the game for me looking back.
Obviously, Alan, like John says, that kind of put us towards a trajectory period. Obviously, before then, John's lived maybe through some bad times during the early 80s. It's obviously progressed. So, speak to my dad, there's other guys that like talking to John. It's kind of giving me education as well. It obviously seems like the 1988, that season, Alan, maybe the history and everything that had to go in that season and it progresses, it seems like it was a major change in the club's history, Alan.
No, definitely. I think that the emphasis on maybe pressure's the right word. No, probably the pressure and providing that kind of league title in that very important year. It's something that you need to probably admire the squad for as well. As John says there, we don't know the kind of difference in the first 11s in the squad back then. I was a toddler at that point, so I probably still had a Celtic vest on. But
I think they've actually got one of the squads. I'm sure that's a cup final squad there. Actually, you can't really see it, but some of the players in there. Do you know what I mean?
McStay, Joe Muller, of course.
In comparison to Rangers, as John was saying, so it seems as if it was it could have been an uphill task for us to get that league title, and then the bonus ball of the Scottish Cup as well. So I know it's very admirable for the players to step up to the mount and kind of make sure in that year of massive importance that will go down in history now that we got those accolades.
One thing I'd like to add, if I may,
the
difference in quality of players technically then compared to now, I would argue was better in the 80s. I'll tell you why. The pitches were in a terrible state in the 80s. By this time of year, they were like ploughed fields. And if you're passing the ball, you had to take account of that when you're passing and receiving the ball. So the level of ball control, by and large, I think was much better then. Today, the game's much faster. So some might say that's more exciting. But you had players who were very comfortable on the ball because they had to be because of the state of the pitches. Even top clubs, they couldn't keep their pitches in good order to the extent they can today. So that was another factor which separates the game in the 1980s to the game now. It was slower, but I think for the most part more skilled in terms of how players had to deal with on the pitch and state of the pitches. And it was also much more physical in the 80s. Tackling was still a thing. I can't remember when the tackle from behind was banned, but you're clattering tackles. Yeah. Now today it's like the game could be played in slippers. There's hardly the contact's minimised, and then players go over easily. That's been normalised. I think that's horrible. That diving now is seen as part of the game. Then before you were castigated, you'd be excoriated if you don't dive in the box to try and get a penalty. That's all changed. So that's a cultural shift that I think is negative compared to what it was in the 1980s.
I think now a huge difference that you need to be an athlete now before a football. I think that the fitness levels now compared to, not that it might be a bad thing, but back then, whereas you could smoke 40 a day and have a six-pack before you go to the park, well, now it's you need to have your kind of cabbage smoothie
protein shakes.
And of course, we're not going to. Of course, we don't advocate that lifestyle, but what that lifestyle produced was more characters. You know, like Where's the Birds, Frank McAvenny and Mo Johnson and ladies' men and going to bars and pubs and getting pissed tonight, but having a few drinks and so on. Now the players are machines. They're like robots. They're getting taught PR classes, but be careful what you say to the media. They're very careful and constrained and controlled is the messaging they give out. They don't want to say anything controversial. And back in those days, players were much freer to be themselves. And that fed into the character of the game. So for how much has been gained, there's been much lost based on the transition to the new era of everything's corporate. Everybody's got to worry about making sure that they don't say anything wrong. Every player is their own brand. Sponsorship, advertisement. Except that wasn't the case in the 1980s, and I miss that. That was something that I think was a wonderful tribute to the culture of the 1980s. You could be yourself, and you had much more free rein to express yourself on the pitch and off the pitch.
No, I agree with you, John. I think it's in terms of now, I think football, maybe the next 10, 15, 20 years, I think it potentially be a non-contact sport. It's getting that way. Like you mentioned, Sunday, we've not really touched much about it in terms of the referee, but I thought the referee was really bad for both teams. But for me, I thought we get behind me a lot, but just wee silly things like the fouls they give and stuff. But in terms of obviously now, John, let's be a bit of the pod, mate. Celtic now, what's your feelings about the now, the managers? So any manager you think you come in, but what's your state of play in terms of the players? Martin O'Neill now coming in, obviously you've lived through it. Obviously, I was a wee nipper then, but you've lived through Martin O'Neill. What's your thoughts on him coming in and kind of state of play at the club at the moment, mate?
Well, we touched on that when we talked about, the statement issued by Dermot Desmond and Brendan Rodgers. Look, in the last 10 days to 2 weeks, it's been a case of the good, the bad and the ugly. The good has been the transformational impact of Martin O'Neill's return to the dugout. He's brought Sean Maloney and Mark Fotheringham, and the galvanising effect is there for all to see, albeit there's only been 2 games, but a huge difference in how the players play the game. They're playing for each other again, they're playing for the manager. It's a Celtic team we can all recognise. There's penetration, the running off the ball is back. They're playing as one. I noticed, I watched the game on Sunday, that they're all together to the point where they're all backing each other up. If there's incidents on the pitch, that wasn't the case. It's clear to me that the team had down tools in relation to Brendan Rodgers, and he'd also down tools. I mean, that Honda Civic remark was ridiculous, unprecedented. I think that should follow him forever. I think he's a mercenary's mercenary. He's a pound shop Jose Mourinho. He was looking clearly to get sacked. That's why he was coming out with these inflammatory statements to trigger his compensation clause in his contract. And so, in relation to that, the board played a blinder in forcing him to resign. We don't know what went on behind the scenes. But on the positive side, Martin O'Neill, I hope he stays for as long as possible. Be interested. I think he does. He will have to in the next couple of games give an indication of how long he is prepared to stay. He's clearly relishing being back. There's nothing succeeds like success, and he's enjoying, the impact he's having, his ideas. He gets Celtic more than I think any manager there's been since the days of Davy Hay and Blake McNeil, but he's the best man manager Celtic have had since Jock Stein.
Do you think, John, that if he doesn't stay as a manager, either a sporting director or something, he should stay at the club?
100%. He should stay on at the club, Ryan, in some capacity, because he loves the club loves him, the fans love him, they revere the man for good reason. So we'll see. I think they play Hearts again at Parkhead in December. That'll be a key moment. It's going to be interesting how they handle the January transfer window. If they've still got an interim manager, will the board give them the budget for transfers, or will they go for loan players coming in? Because if a new manager comes in, he doesn't like you understand that difficulty. I would like him to stay till the end of the season. There's no short list of candidates being drawn up. That'll take time. They shouldn't rush the process. If he is minded to stay, that would be wonderful to give the time for a transition period to take place and to unfold. And he should have a January transfer window at his disposal. But this is a difference a manager can make. Look at what he's getting out of the same players that Brendan Rodgers was comparing to a Honda Civic in public. these are good players. There's some very good players. They need strength. We know that up front, especially same in midfield. But they are good players, and they're playing now for a manager who believes in them and who actually likes them, not a manager who's deriding them in public. You imagine you're a player and you're hearing that from your manager compared to Honda Civic. You imagine the WhatsApp chat groups that are going on, what they're saying to each other. You know, it was never going to work.
John, I think the players need to take a bit of ownership in that as well, because he did come out and he mollycoddled them when we were playing badly with poor performance after poor performance. He came out and says, no, they're playing well. It does get to a point you need to try a different avenue. Maybe the civic part, that's maybe a bit too far, but you need to try a different perspective on things. The players were they performing for him. I think the players need to take a certain amount of that.
Certainly. I mean, they get paid well. The player. There is the sentiment that they're professionals and they should act like professionals. But I would say, Alan, they're also humans and they need to be motivated and they need to feel valued and so on. Did he defend the player? Who knows what the conversations were like taking place behind the scenes in the training ground, in the dressing room? What I do know is Brendan Rodgers learned his trade at the feet of Jose Mourinho. And Jose Mourinho is notorious for castigating his own players and creating divisions in the dressing room, because he has this idea that if you put players' backs to the wall, you make them feel that they're not producing, that'll motivate them. I disagree with that approach. But that was the approach I think Brendan Rodgers brought to the club. He clearly had success at the club, but I do think it was a mistake to bring him back, especially given the circumstances in which he left the club first time round. But it's easy to look back in hindsight and identify those things. I am personally glad that Ange is not coming back. Great manager, had a great time at Celtic Park, but I think he'll be damaged goods after his experience at Nottingham Forest and also Spurs. I don't know if he'd be well equipped to come back to the Scottish game, but anyway, he's ruled himself out, so that's not going to be a factor. Does anybody know what Henrik Larsson's doing nowadays? I mean,
shoots for Celtic to sell football tips. That's what he's doing. Nothing more than that. No. No, you don't like that road, I don't think. I love him.
There's always a danger in bringing icons back to the club because they might fail and their legacy is tarnished. But my main point is I'd like to see Martin O'Neill stay till the end of the season. I hope that he gives an indication on that. He's got the perfect right. He's come in at short notice, unexpectedly, 73 years of age, but he's still in fantastic shape. And as I say, he seems to be relishing the task, so long may it continue.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. Alan and John, I hope it's the next few weeks. Obviously, the game on Sunday should hopefully give us a massive belief going forward. And it's quite interesting that Callum Osmond, again, says about belief in players. And again, we're not even between the lines, but Arne Engels says that we're happy with the management now. So it just seems a bit bigger kind of fresh air in the team for me, lads. And also, John, your book, where can people get it?
Any good bookshop, Waterstones, Amazon, of course. Any bookstore is widely available.
A wee photo there of it there. Doesn't know about
thank you guys. Yeah. The publisher did a great job with the cover. So I hope the book captures the ethos. It's quite honest. It's brutally honest at times. It's got a lot of politics in it, but I think it's part of the wider context in which Celtic exists. Thanks for having me on, guys. I've really enjoyed it.
No problem. Obviously, it would have been good to talk another hour or two, because there's loads to talk about, John. Because obviously, for me, Alan slightly, but for me, I wasn't born then, so this is kind of educational for me to know about certain things. And there's obviously loads of things you could talk, not in a podcast. You could talk about different things, like you say, political stuff. It is in the book, so there is a lot. And I've read some of the book. I've still got a lot to go through, but there's some in the book that is political. There's about Celtic. I think for me, Alan, in terms of the book, John says some of it is pretty brutally honest, but it's about John's time as a fan. So it is what do you call it, a bird's eye view of what happened. It's not just online. Like now, I need to go online. Now I can tell if I have kids, I can say, listen, we beat Vince here, this has happened through the board and this. But back then, John's telling a first-hand experience. So for me, if you're a Celtic fan that likes to hear experiences, all the history, if it's political, if it's the football side of it, it's definitely a book for me, Alan, that I think people should go and get, because especially if you're sitting at a pool, if you're just in the house and you want to learn about Celtic, it's definitely about Alan to pass a bit of time, learn some history and learn about a bird's eye view, Alan, of Celtic.
There's first-hand perspective, honestly. John's thoughts and kind of his opinions and experiences that they living through the times and stages. So I know definitely everybody go out and buy the book. Nobody likes a book that's no completely honest. We want it to be right to the point, no matter what it's like. So that's like somebody like Michael McIntyre, a comedy instead of Frankie Boyle. It's just a bit blah in it. So I prefer something that's right to the point. Just get right in about it, and if nobody likes it, then so be it. But I respect I respect somebody that's straight to the point, tells the truth, and aye, no messing about. So I definitely, guys, if you're interested in reading, get into Waterstones or Amazon for John's book. And thanks very much for coming on, John. It's been an experience, and thank you.
Thanks, guys. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And also, like Alan says there, you can get it Waterstones. John says Amazon as well. If anybody can't get on that and you want to contact us, we can obviously contact. You can contact us on Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got TikTok. We can also give you John. Obviously, John's on social media. If you need to go through John,
I've got some signed copies available. So if anybody wants a signed copy for Christmas, for a Christmas present, then as you say, I'm available on X, John Wight 1. You can send me a DM and we can work things out. So,
You've heard from the man. There's you heard the man himself. He's got some copies there. So if anybody does want some copies, or if you just want to buy it yourself, you can buy it obviously online. But John, thanks again, mate. I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. And hopefully we can maybe see Martin in the dugout and your wishes might be granted, mate. So again, get the book Amazon Waterstones. Fantastic book so far that I've read through, and I'm sure the rest will be thank you. But John, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Thanks, lads.
Hail. Thank you.
Hail.
Sets up Larsson here. Larsson. Oh, he's in! Henrik Larsson! That is sensational! O'Reilly, how about that for a pass? Jota! How about that for a finish? That is Jota for you!
In for Henrik Larsson, and Moravcik! His first goal for Celtic!
Here is Shunsuke Nakamura! Exquisite!